like it's before. There are all these streetlights wired up blocking you off from the majesty of the heavens, which is really just a government plot anyways to keep you disconnected from nature. Let's go back to a finer time, a nicer time, a quieter time. Uranus had just conjuncted Neptune. Suddenly, there was a shocking revelation of all the mystical and weird, strange things brought to the electronic medium of television. Come with me as we explore the most subversive and conspiratorial show of all time, unbelievably put onto a mainstream network. Yes, that's right. All the government conspiracies you could possibly imagine. And who can save us? 2 FBI agents. Yeah, don't think too deeply about it. Don't go down that rabbit hole. We're going down another rabbit hole because today we're going to talk about the astrological implications of the X-Files, and we might even get to our own little conspiracy theory. Follow me. I think I should preface this by saying we live in a synchronistic universe where it's just possible that even on the layers of a fictional television show, that the movement of the planets and the stars above us might possibly have some form of discernible effect. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that this wasn't intentional. In fact, I think I might try and make an argument that it's entirely intentional. But here we go. Within the first season of The X-Files, Chris Carter made it specifically known the birth dates of both of our main characters. Okay? Now, he never mentioned a birth time, but within the running of this show, we see within the first 3 seasons that some of the most prominent mythological episodes that happened are dated at the beginning of the episode and give us a clear indication. And the transits which are happening to the natal charts of these characters are specifically descriptive of the type of internal journey these characters are going through in the most bizarre and intense circumstances. I want to start by discussing the natal chart of Dana Scully. Now, as I stated, we're not given any birth times for these 2 characters. However, I believe that there were specific clues given within this show to give a sense of what their actual natal charts were. Now, birth time rectification is an extremely serious, long-term process which takes years of watching very specific things happen in a chart as planets cross the angles and using the progressed angles to try and time out exactly when a human being was born. And you can do it. You really can. Now, I'm not saying we're going to take Scully and Mulder exactly that seriously, but I do believe I have very valid points, and I do believe that I've discovered what their natal charts actually look like. So let's start with Scully first off. If you were to take a wild guess about what the main energy in Dana Scully's chart is, what do you think that would be? What would you choose? And what I would choose, as far as I'm concerned, she's an Aquarius. She's an extreme Aquarius. Her interest in science and technology, her sort of cold, detached nature. Note, the sun is in detriment in Aquarius. It's the coldest. The sun has a hard time shining, and Dana is not about her own individual glory. Dana is about coming to the truth, to the facts, to the key word of Aquarius, I know. And so when I saw, oh my goodness, she was born in February, and I dig up the chart. She was born 3 degrees outside of Aquarius. Can you believe it? Dana Scully is a Pisces. Woo! I'm just gonna give it one more. Woo! Yes, she is. But it didn't quite measure for me, although within a noon chart, which is what you would generally cast for a natal chart that you don't have a specific time for, she does have Saturn and Mercury within Aquarius, noting Saturn is dignified within Aquarius. We're not going to deal with these little outer planets we can't see here as rulers. At any rate, Saturn is conjunct Mercury in her chart. No joke. Sort of. Well, it's pretty wide. But you know what? Regardless, Mercury is ruled by Saturn within the chart. She has a rigid, firm understanding of the science that she discusses and is fixed in her thought process. Mind you, her Sun, her Mars, are both mutable in Pisces. And we see this conflict within her character of the pull between science and Piscean belief. Keyword for Aquarius, I know. Keyword for Pisces, I believe. In the show, there's a constant conflict between Mulder and Scully regarding how do you prove that which is unprovable, that which is beyond our senses and our ability to comprehend. Through her experience, she's able to come to an understanding of the supernatural and realize it's there even if she can't prove it. It's a fascinating mixture of these two energies in her chart. Now, regardless, because she comes off as an Aquarius, the rising sign, the eastern horizon of a chart, this is one's personality. This is what one projects out there. So to me, she has to be an Aquarius rising. It has to be. So I plugged it in, I played around with it a bit, and I had a bit of an idea of what I thought her chart would look at. And then, now, listen, if you watch the X-Files, you know there's hints, there's clues, there's deep layers to this show. There is a specific shot, and I wish I knew what episode it was that I screenshotted it from, because when I saw it, I said, this is it, she's telling us right here. He's telling us. There's a very long, specific, and conspicuous tracking shot of Scully pulling in with the car, and this close-up on her face with this license plate, which states 2SAQ321. Now the second, as an astrologer, the second you see A and Q together, boy oh boy, do you not think Aquarius? I sure do. So here we are, I see it, and I'm thinking there's something about this license plate I need to recognize and know. So I thought, okay, 2 and S. It could either be 2 degrees Aquarius, but why the S? No, that's a 5. It's a coded 5. It's a conspiracy. I'm getting inside your head, Chris. I'm getting inside your head. Okay, whew. It's just the chip that they put in my brain when they abducted me. Okay, let's not linger on it. Let's not focus on it. They can't steal my memories. They can't steal my memories. They can only create new ones. Okay, so I realized 2 and S. That's 25. 25 Aquarius. And when I punched that in, I'd been working with a chart where her midheaven was Scorpio and her IC was Taurus, which made a certain amount of sense. But then I realized it's double coded. It's 25 Aquarius, but the SA is also for Sagittarius, which is her midheaven. Sagittarius, the most honest sign, quest towards the truth, trying to discover the truth of the bigger things. That's her midheaven. That's her work. Now, within the story, we learn that Scully set out to become a medical doctor, and her father, we're going to come back to this one in a minute, who was a military man, didn't want her to join the FBI. But Scully, with a mutable IC and a mutable midheaven, was on a quest for the truth, and she couldn't stick to one job. Mutable, changing, more than one job. So she became a medical doctor working for the FBI. Whoo, many, many hats this woman wears, many hats. Now, I've also come to know that apparently that license plate is one of these simply non-issued license plates, like the area code on a phone number 555 that TV shows in Hollywood just goes back to constantly because they can't get sued because they know it's a safe license plate. You'll see it in other shows, but I don't know. I still think it was a clue. So once I plugged this in, suddenly the whole chart just made so much sense. Now, first off, what I want to talk about is her ascendant places her Mercury into the 12th house of seclusion and self-undoing, all these different themes. Scully's Mercury in the 12th, could it possibly imply a need to uncover that which is hidden from oneself? Interestingly enough, planet within the 12th house, while it's seemingly hidden to the person trying to manifest this energy, at the same point in time has something to prove. And so her rigid, fixed, Saturn-ruled Mercury is there to document the data, document the facts, and stick to the truth that her midheaven implies. Another part of this Aquarius Piscean conflict within her chart is that as a woman of science, Scully is also a Christian. They don't linger on it too much, although there's a couple key episodes where they really talk about what that means and why that's important. Because deep down, as a Pisces, Scully wants to believe. Scully needs to have belief and faith. And as the show goes on, the only thing she truly believes in is Mulder. Scully has the moon in Cancer dignified there, a very nurturing moon. It's in her 5th house, and it's conjunct her north lunar node. There's a certain destiny that Scully has in this life to take care of others. And she does that within her role at the FBI. She does comfort other people. She's capable of doing that. She has a deep sense of empathy, despite the Saturnine personality she gives off, despite the Saturn wall that she meets people with. I'll tell you that as I rewatched this show, which I loved so much in my youth, watching episode by episode, which was a very difficult thing to accomplish back in the pre-internet days of television, when, you know, someone's little brother could come in and demand they had to watch step by step, instead of watch the final season finale of X-Files. I'm gonna get into it. I'm gonna let it go. Okay. I'll tell you, as I was rewatching, in one of the most incredible episodes starring Brad Dourif, it's just one of the most intense things you'll ever see on television, Beyond the Sea. This is the first time that we get a solid. They don't have the date at the beginning of the episode, mind you. They just happen to mention that it's after Christmas, and we do know the year that this took place within. So it's January of 1994, and Scully's father dies. Once I plugged that in, I realized this was Scully's Saturn return. This is probably the most significant transit one goes through within astrology, as each planet represents a layer of consciousness. As you're growing, the moon is your mother and nurturing, and it makes a cycle within a month. As you start to articulate your fingers and start to figure out that you can cry and manipulate your parents that way. At 3 months, Mercury has done a heliocentric orbit around the sun. Then at 8 months, Venus has come around. Taste and what you like and what you dislike starts to come into play. At 1 year, the sun has made a full orbit around your... Yeah, I know. Listen, it's a geocentric arc, okay? I know I just said heliocentric twice. Just try to stick with me, okay? Just let it go. Let it happen. The sun has orbited around the flat Earth one time. And around this time, the baby is able to start pulling themselves up and standing on their own, asserting their solar self-esteem, their solar identity. At 2 years, Mars comes around. And terrible twos, Mars, tantrums, running, climbing. 2 years old. It's amazing. 3 is worse, but they don't tell you about that one. And then at 11 and a half years, Jupiter has made one orbit now around the sun. Around your chart. It's orbiting around your chart. Let's get this straight. Your ability to take in deeper wisdom, understand the results of your actions on others, take in a deeper philosophical layer to your consciousness. Around this time, people start to figure out the social game on a far more conscious level at age 12. And then we get to age 28 to 30. Now, retrograde motion, again, listen, I don't want to go too deep into the weeds here. It's geocentric, okay? It's from our perspective on Earth. What we see affects us. We experience it from the Earth. The sun is always shining, and yet the Earth turns. You know damn well the sun goes away for 12 hours, all right? So let's not get too crazy about the fact that geocentric has an effect upon human consciousness. Just accept it. So at around age 28 or 30, Saturn has made one cycle around, and Saturn rules your ability to structure your life, to plan long term, the ability to be disciplined, the ability to be able to it's connected to Mercury in some ways. Apparently I'm debilitated. Oh yeah, sorry, Saturn squares my Mercury. There you go. At any rate, Saturn is your ability to structure your life, your ability to think long term, your ability to build something. It's your work ethic. In fact, Saturn is your astro daddy. When Saturn comes around and asserts itself, conjuncts its spot in your natal chart, Saturn becomes your father, your righteous father, here to spank you when you come and reward you when you've done good. Hard work is its own reward, so Saturn thinks. At any rate, Saturn return is often a very difficult time in someone's life, as they're given the keys and the knowledge and wisdom that they've been a child for 30 years. And whether someone takes that message and moves forward in a responsible manner, or continues to go down the same self-destructive path they're on, sort of determines whether someone can become an adult and a productive member of society or not. Scully is a Saturnine individual to begin with, as I believe that her ascendant is in Aquarius, and her Mercury and Saturn are there as a fact. It's canon. So Scully has manifested a degree of Saturnine ability to become a medical doctor and an FBI agent by the time before she's even 30. She's lived an extremely productive life and is clearly a very hard-working human being. For these people, Saturn returns often aren't quite as difficult. Saturn transits tend to often bring rewards or be a very positive time. In this episode, however, Scully's father dies, and Saturn represents the father, and I happen to know someone whose father died on their Saturn return. This is not unheard of, it's very literal. Perhaps the message of the Saturn return of someone who is clearly so Saturnine and diligent and able to be rigid and strong within what needs to be done, already building a life of meaning which is worth something to others and to society at large. Perhaps sometimes what Saturn has to come and do is say, you need to not forget your family, you need to take time out for the people you love in your life. Saturn can send many messages, all of them worth listening to. When I saw this was my clue that, oh, is he doing this consciously? Is he consciously using astrology? No, this is a show about the paranormal and about the weird and wild and wonderful, the Uranus conjunct Neptune show. I'm wearing a Pluto shirt, but the show's very Plutonian. Give me a break. So, at this point, I started to take it very seriously and note down any time there was a date on the show, start investigating what was happening. And it was relentlessly significant. He never let me down with these dates. Until... Okay, we'll get there. The relationship between the sun and the moon is one of the key factors of being human on the earth, period. We watch the moon to determine the moons, don't we? At any rate, whatever moon phase you were born under becomes a significantly important interpretive factor in a natal chart. Scully was born under the waxing half moon, a phase where there's a momentum towards the new and towards being prominent and towards showing yourself to the world. We also use chart formation patterns as a means of determining the energy between the planets and how they're distributed within the signs and houses. Scully is a seesaw pattern where you see some planets on one half and another assortment of planets on the other half with an easy cut down the middle. You can see a space down the middle. These are people who are drawn between two different ideas and two different worlds, as you prominently see in Scully's life. Scully has a potent planetary pileup in her chart, starting with Mars-Sun-Saturn conjunction. The Mars-Sun conjunction is going to tend to push someone, drive them to push towards their goals in a very forceful manner. Could even imply anger issues. But we have to take Saturn into account here, which has a tendency to restrain those energies and keep them in check. Someone using Saturn at the highest level is going to be able to restrain their Mars to work diligently and effectively instead of be derailed by impulse and anger, which I think we can all argue Scully does. And as we all know, Saturn certainly has the upper hand in Aquarius. Well, we don't all know that now, do we? Now, Mars has a tendency to be a little, how shall we put it, not at its strongest in watery Pisces. Mutable, wishy-washy Martian energy. This is destabilizing to a certain extent in her ability to be able to accomplish what she wants. But it's also opposed by Uranus. Now, within the context of this show and her chart, Mulder entering the scene is a literal manifestation of Uranus derailing everything she wants to do with her career at the FBI. Suddenly going down sewers, chasing freaky fluke men, and staring at the sky, lights in the sky. And everything that happens to her is a direct result of her working with Mulder. And Mulder does indeed represent the shocking, eccentric elements of Uranus in this show. Uranus in her chart is in the 7th house. The 7th house of partners, not only marriage partners, but also business partners, or could be a working partner in this case. Uranus, her close connection to Mulder. It's perfect. It's so literal. You're telling me you didn't use this on purpose? Or is the universe just this synchronistic that the planets work unconsciously on a page when writing a script, which I actually happen to believe and have seen at work in my life? We can talk about this some other day. Let's not get too... we got a lot to go through here. A lot. Scully has a Venus-Jupiter conjunction within Aries. Now, Venus is debilitated within Aries. Can be a little bit too impulsive and a little too fiery for the lovely, seductive Venus. And in fact, especially with the addition of Jupiter there, spurning on to just go after what you want and just be perhaps too aggressive about it and have desires that are out of control and raging. We don't really see it until the episode Never Again, so maybe take a look at that one if you want to see Scully's Venus-Jupiter conjunction, if you know what I mean. If you pay attention between the cracks, you can really see Scully's Piscean nature, her sympathy with people, the softness that she's constantly trying to hide, working in this aggressive, manly 90s FBI situation as Scully tries to cover up her Cancer moon and her Pisces sun. Makes it even more prevalent that she has Saturn conjunct her ascendant, which allows her to, despite being a deeply emotional and easily wounded human being, project something that is stoic and solid and rigid. Often in astrology, we see the same themes repeated in numerous ways in a chart. And in her chart, with this seesaw pattern, with the conflict between the Pisces and the Aquarius, we also have Neptune, which is closely related to Pisces in modern astrology. Not the ruler, but there's a similarity there. Let's not tie them together too tightly, because she has Neptune in Scorpio, where there's some form of delusion within her desire to merge fully with someone. Is this part of the reason why she's been single for so long? Neptune is within her 9th house of religion and philosophy and higher meaning. And so within that, we see where there is a conflict there, where she can be deluded in certain ways, to the point where, especially in these early seasons, you're tearing your hair out saying, look, there's an alien right in front of you. Why are you denying this? Why are you so obsessed with coming up with a theory that's going to be acceptable to your uppers? This is a very Saturn thing, where she's trying to conform to the society at large and to rigid expectations, and even allows her religion to get in the way of what she's seeing. And this is a very Neptunian theme, which happens to be squaring her Mercury, where again we see this mixture of conflicting energies in Scully's chart. I also like the fact that her IC is in Gemini. The IC is the lowest point on the chart. It's often misunderstood and poorly used by astrology, when in fact this is your root to the earth. It's your roots, your cultural roots, spanning out in infinite fractal dimensions across generations. And it's what brought you here to this moment and inspires you and motivates you. All the planets, every single day, have to spin around. They get to this lowest point on the chart, where the sun would be at midnight, below the earth, on the other side of the ecliptic. And then they rise up to be shown in the world. This is your deepest motivation. Scully's deepest motivation is in Gemini. She craves freedom, but she wants the air, the interests, the ideas. She wants to debate people. She wants to talk about things. And this is where we see why she connects with Mulder on such a deep level. Scully needs someone to wrestle with. It should be noted, too, that within the 20th century there were two great conjunctions of the outer planets, the three that we can't see from the Earth. Uranus sometimes, sort of, but you know, that weren't part of the classical lights, which represent real layers of consciousness that astrologers have understood for thousands of years. The three outer planets bring in newer, weirder energies. They bring in what's beyond the brains of Saturn tradition. And within the 60s, Scully was born under the Uranus-Pluto conjunction. Not exact, but it's certainly close enough, where the truth of the shocking things of society started to erupt. Psychedelics came out and blew people's minds in the wider culture. And they'd always been around, of course, but within the culture at the same time of these civil rights battles happening, and a generation sort of tearing up what they'd been told was real. Very Plutonian, Uranian experience. She was born within this. Again, we see these themes repeated within her chart, which is not just a coincidence. Must have been a master astrologer who picked this time. Casting an astrological chart for a fictional character one is going to work on can create deep ranges of meaning where this character can grow beyond your petty little human imagination could have conceived. To pick a date, to find a date, and there are methods you can do this randomly or with some forethought, suddenly this chart, if you understand astrology, becomes this whole network of meaning within this person's life, and this character can start to take on a life of their own. The most profound way you can use it is for an ongoing series like the X-Files. If you begin to start tracking the transits of planets to this chart, when you get to that, 5th, 6th, 7th season slump, you know what I mean? There could be ideas coming in from the outer planets of where you need to take these characters and what should happen. Now, having said that, we need to talk about Mulder. Don't we? Don't we all want to talk about Mulder? Oh, he's so charming. First thing you need to know about Mulder is Mr. Chris Carter gave him the same birthday as his own. Ha! Who would have thought? In fact, members of the staff on the X-Files have mentioned that they were all conscious of the fact that Fox was Chris Carter's avatar within the show, and often Fox would treat difficult situations in the show while staying calm in a similar manner to how Chris Carter would run the entire series. And this is interesting to me because, note, he used the same birthday but not the same date, right? Mulder's younger than Chris Carter was at the time. Perhaps in Chris Carter's imagination, he thought he was too old to score a hot chick like Scully. He was wrong. At any rate. Most prominently, we see within this that Mulder is a Libra sun, as well as Chris Carter, of course. Now, Libra is Venus-ruled. It's cardinal, it's a driving sign, but it's within the fall. It's at the time of year after the autumnal equinox, where the light is waning, the yin factor is on the rise. It's a more receptive time. It's a time where the group becomes the foremost thought process as we move into the fall. Mulder is a group-oriented thinker, despite being a loner. But we're going to talk about that. Libra is a charming sign, of course, being ruled by Venus. Beauty and niceness and kindness and a desire to bring balance to the force is a strong momentum within the sign of Libra. But when I look at Mulder, there's a mercurial element to him that we just don't get out of his natal chart. And so immediately when I was looking at this chart cast from a noon perspective, to me it became clear for numerous reasons that he was a Virgo. There's a certain element of him being very particular about how he puts himself out into the world. Although note, the ascendant is not the same as your solar energy, your inner heart and core of what motivates you. Mulder is not motivated by the fine details, although he would like to be, and he tries. One of the core repeating motifs of this show is that he's never able to amass the evidence he needs to actually prove the existence of aliens or all these other supernatural things. At the end, it all mysteriously goes away on him. You know, perhaps if he was a Virgo sun, he would have actually got to it. Meanwhile, so I cast the chart for 15 degrees Virgo, but the show decided to really hammer home his birth time in a prominent way, and I happen to believe that it was on purpose, and it's profound, and it's intense. So maybe we'll jump to this first, and then we'll come back to Mulder's natal chart. Or maybe I'll do something completely different in editing. I don't know yet. First episode, Season 2, Little Green Men. Chris gives us a dated and timed cut screen showing the moment of Mulder's deepest inspiration, the moment that absolutely changed Mulder's life and made him the character that we know and love, the abduction of his sister Samantha. Now, you might think, and certainly it played out this way, that giving dates and times for the beginning of episodes and now they're here gives the show a more realistic procedural feel, as if you're watching a documentary on following these investigators around on the crime scene. And it does do that. It's quite effective in making these weirder supernatural monsters and things seem slightly more real. But of course it's more than that. These were significant astrological clues, and I'm certain, I'm convinced. I'm crazy! I'm convinced! You see? Now when we watch this episode, before we even get to the real prominent inciting moment, which blew my mind when I looked at it, the episode itself opens with a scene, an amazing scene that's completely stolen by the film Contact, by the way, where the camera's pulling out through the solar system and Mulder's doing this amazing dialogue about the possibilities of life on other planets and his mission and all this stuff. And he says, out past the orb of Neptune. Okay, which blew my mind, because Pluto has such an erratic orbit. At the time the show was made, Neptune actually was the outermost planet, so I thought that was interesting, but also curious. Pluto, for the most time, is the outermost planet. Man, we're still counting a planet up in this house. Deal with it. Deal with it. The fact that they specifically mention Neptune in the beginning of the episode, of course, it gets your mind going there. So when I looked at this chart of the moment of Samantha's abduction, what blew my mind immediately was the fact that Neptune was very close to the IC of his chart within this time I picked. So I used that moment to rectify the time. And again, if you're doing this with a real human being, you're going to be a lot more careful and rigid about it. I'm working with very limited information on a TV show, so it's a fictional character. It's not like I'm going to be giving Mulder advice that's going to ruin his life any more than he ruins it already. So I rectified it so that the IC was exactly on Neptune. Now, Neptune is the planet of mysticism and higher ideals, but it's also a planet of deep-seated guilt and self-undoing to a certain extent, often, and delusions, mind you. There could not be a more perfect transit to express simply with one single image the entire character of Mulder and what a defining moment his sister being abducted was. Then Neptune on his IC, his deepest motivational point. What happens at the IC rises up and becomes the MC, becomes your peak of status in the world. And this is what we see with Mulder. And it's hard for me to believe that this scene was not made specifically to send that message through. Why he wanted to code his show with astrology to such a deep... I mean, I don't know. It's there. All I can say is it's there. If we dig deeper into this, Mulder was born under a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which in many ways is one of the most important transits in astrology. One of the most important aspects. When you're doing mundane astrology, the conjoining of Jupiter and Saturn have always been used to cast charts to predict the future of a nation and where things are going within this 20-year cycle between these planets. Jupiter is your wisdom and it's the expanse of blowing things up to the largest proportions, and Saturn is restrictive and constraining and trying to rigidly structure things into a useful and cohesive form. When the powers of Jupiter and Saturn come together, Jupiter helps to loosen up the bounds of Saturn a little bit, and Saturn helps to restrain the more destructive excesses of Jupiter. Having Mulder born under this conjunction is a powerful element of his chart which we can't ignore, and allows one to be able to, in the long term, structure cohesive action in the world and not allow Saturn to restrict them and restrain them too much. This conjunction squares his sun. Mulder's sun is fallen within Libra. Now the sun is considered fallen within Libra because there's an element of restriction within how one is able to manifest their heart in the world, because Libra is so concerned with balance. Often their own solar energy is not exhibited powerfully enough, and they can wind up in situations where other people are getting the best of them instead of them asserting what they need for their own heart. But this is the sign, this is Libra, this is the fall, this is the group. The group is rising here. Now when we cast this chart to have Neptune directly on his IC in the moment his sister was abducted, we also find that Pluto winds up on his ascendant. Well, how amazing is this? Pluto is the planet of harsh truth, of uncovering that which is hidden. And it's within his 12th house, his hidden 12th house as well. And here we see, he's born a few years before Scully, that the Uranus is moving up to that great conjunction with Pluto. It's taking place within his 12th house. And Uranus, the planet of shocking revelations and eccentricity, is conjunct his north lunar node. How fascinating is that? His future is aimed towards unveiling the shocking truths, okay? But his past, his south lunar node, is conjunct Chiron. Of all things, conjunct Chiron in Pisces, his deep-seated guilt that he was there when his sister was abducted and he didn't do anything. He couldn't do anything. It's such an unfair weight that Mulder places upon himself. But part of his makeup is that he has Pluto squaring his moon. The outermost planet and the innermost planet. This is one of the hardest aspects in astrology. So this intense feeling of the Plutonian message of trying to dig into the earth, into the depths of things and find the truth, no matter how hard it is and how brutal it is to actually see it, is grinding up against his moon, his past, his memories, his home, and his moon is conjunct his IC, no less. So this deep inner guilt, and he can't stop living it. He can't stop being in that moment where his sister's abducted. Another prominent element of Pluto being conjunct his ascendant is the Plutonian mythology. I mean, Pluto who abducted Persephone and brought her down into hell, Hades. Where'd that come from? Hades. This is the original stolen daughter motif, the original stolen daughter story. And here, that planet is right on his ascendant when he projects out into the moon. It was rising. Pluto was rising. Mulder was born. If I'm right. And I'm right! Now, another prominent element of Mulder's chart is the Mercury-Mars-Neptune conjunction within Scorpio. Now this, we gotta tear this apart a little bit. Scorpio is this sign of just intense, obsessive merging with the other. It's watery, but it's fixed, so it's like when Scorpio has their claws in you, they don't want to let go. The fascinating thing about this intense conjunction that he has here is that it's within the third house. The third house of siblings. Siblings are represented by the third house. So this Neptunian guilt is driving his mind, Mercury, and his muscles, his ability to do things out in the world, Mars. It's all conjoined within the obsessions, the passionate obsessions of Scorpio. Mulder will do anything to find his sister, to relieve himself of the guilt, to find some sort of closure. Oh man, we do get some, listen, I'm only spoiling the first 3 seasons. I'm not going to go to that. Oof, I got chills thinking about that episode. Anyone who's an X-Files fan knows what I'm talking about. Oof, chills. Mulder also has Venus within Virgo, okay? So he has 2 planets fallen. And Venus in Virgo rules his sun in Libra. Well, isn't this interesting? Venus is fallen in Virgo because Virgo is too particular, it's too picky, it's too obsessed with the finer details. Venus has no time for this. Venus wants to be freely love, which is why its opposition in Pisces is exalted, where there's a capability with Venus in Pisces to fall in love with anything at any time. This just pure, watery, just acceptance of the beauty of life. Virgo's the exact opposite. I mean, it's too nitpicky, and too Venus and Virgo people have a very hard time finding what they need, what they want. Nothing's good enough. And Mulder has this within his first house. It's very prominent. So he's already a Libra. So there's an element of beauty and style in how he puts himself out there. This rising Libra energy, but his Venus is also the only planet in his first house, so there's this accentuation on his charm and his ability to come off and be likable by everyone, despite being such a pariah within the department. But is his Venus in Virgo not part of the reason why we see this extremely charming, successful man be alone without a partner for the entirety of the run of the show? Interesting. And what is it that makes it so hard for him to pull the trigger on this obvious love with Scully? Is it this Pluto conjunction with his ascendant, where with Venus in fall in Virgo, where he's too caught up in his head, and even though he would do anything for her with this scorpionic energy, he'd die for Scully. She becomes almost a stand-in for his sister, who he can't do anything to help anymore. But he will do everything he can to save Scully. We'll see that because this prominent Plutonian theme within his chart gets played out again and again throughout the show. And maybe now's a good time to mention that throughout the first 3 seasons, Pluto happens to be conjunct his moon. We'll get into that a little bit later in more depth, because it's an extremely important element of where we start this story with Mulder. Mulder's MC is in Gemini, okay? So again, we see this mutable axis here, where his job is about the ideas. He's more interested in sharing these ideas and proving them, the wilder the better, his friendship with the lone gunman, etc., than he is in actually solving a case, which is a very Gemini trait in a way of it's more about the idea and accomplishing things. As I'm done with this video, we got something else to do over here, where he's often not there with the facts all lined up to seal the deal, but he's just chasing the next idea all the time. And Mulder is a brilliant character, as we see with his probing deep in the depths, Scorpio Mercury ruling his ascendant. We start the show being told Mulder is one of the most gifted profilers of the entire department, where he's just able to catch these serial killers and just get inside their minds and understand who they are in this really profound, almost psychic way. Well, wouldn't having Neptune conjunct Mercury in Scorpio not be a profound, nearly psychic lineup to be able to put yourself into the darkest depths of a very disturbed mind? He did it. It happened. Also, let's note that his moon, Mercury, Mars, and Neptune are all in the 3rd house. So again, the 3rd house is where you would place siblings, so this is a prominent theme. But it's also of communication and of being able to put your ideas out into the world. In fact, Mulder's chart is almost entirely projective. It's on the rising projective half of the houses. And what's coming up as the Earth rotates, what's coming up towards the ascendant, this is what's from inside you that you're putting out into the world. These aren't the best listeners, people with prominent projective intuition quadrant charts. But these people can be very brilliant and have a lot to say, but they're not the best at receiving information back, understanding that people aren't on their level and aren't seeing what they're seeing. And is this not a prominent trait of Mulder that we see throughout the entire show? Another element of a Libra sun we see with Mulder all the time. It's like he gives very, very difficult and sometimes horrible people way too much rope all the time. And in fact, sometimes he's extremely angry at someone, especially someone he's close to. He wants to, you can see it in him, and he restrains himself. It's an amazing acting. The way that David Duchovny plays this character, you can see the Libra trait within him. You can see the Scorpio bubbling up through the Libra, and he's just like, there's something about Libra energy where you can see them start to get mad, but they can't do it. They can't allow that anger out because their entire solar energy is all about balance. But one of the most powerful things about Libra is that a Libran person can be very controversial and have views that don't line up with other people because they're about balance. So even though Mulder has a chart which should be prominently about fitting into society, the greater society, and doing what's right for everyone, the fact that his ideas that are so controversial are being hidden from the public forces him to create that balance. He needs to be that messianic figure who goes out there and fights for the truth, even if it goes against his Libran qualities of wanting things to be nice and kind and easy. But just watch when he storms into an office and he wants to give her, but he can't quite do it. It's amazing. It's beautiful. This show is fantastic. Note that his IC is in Sagittarius. Quest for the truth. Relentless quest for the truth. The truth is in here. In fact, the only planets above the horizon in Mulder's chart are Uranus and Pluto. This is his entire purpose. This is what people see, is this eccentric, relentless pursuit towards the truth. And being within his 12th house implies it's a self-undoing, even though it gives him so much meaning to keep pursuing these things that nobody else believes. It also destroys his life in many, many ways. Mulder's Libra sun is in the 2nd house of values and assets, and what one person is born into this life with, and what they can use to their benefit. And what's a better asset to Mulder than his charming, boyish, little sly grin that he gets away with everything with? This creepy little nerd is charming as all heck! The canonically timed chart for Samantha Mulder's Abduction is a profound work in and of itself. It really makes me wonder how much they were paying the on-show astrologer. Probably not enough, because this is kind of a masterpiece. Within this chart, we see that there's a Mars-Uranus opposition, like exact opposition, and the time that they give us is exactly on the MCIC axis. So let's look at this from a purely mundane standpoint before we look at it with Mulder's chart. So you've got the MC, the highest, most prominent part of this chart. What's visible, what's the most visible, what's up in the midheaven. Mars is right there, dignified in Aries. This is an aggressive chart. You can see right there, Mars exactly conjunct the MC is out there to grab and take. Being opposed by Uranus, obviously, in a shocking and, unfortunately, in this instance, a really tragic way. Now, we see Chiron is also within the 9th house in Aries, close to this Mars-MC conjunction. You'd have to interpret this as part of the chart. This wound, again, is coming up, this Chironian wound of deep, deep sorrows that, never heal. That's the mythology of Chiron. I don't want to get too deep into it, but within the astrology of this show, Chiron does assert itself and becomes a prominent feature. And very specifically, Chiron is squaring the moon within this chart. So here we have Mother in the past and memories, and this gets deeper as you understand some of the realities of Samantha getting abducted, beyond it being simply an alien abduction, but actually a deeper government plot. We learn later, I'll just spoil it now, whatever, we'll get to it eventually anyways, is that the mother was asked to choose. This becomes a part of the story. And so here you have Chiron squaring the mother squaring Chiron. Deep, tragic, horrifying stuff. Also note that Venus is in this midpoint between squaring both the midheaven and the IC, squaring both Mars and Uranus. So you have this T-square here, this powerful, very difficult T-square of the aggression of Mars, the desires and choices. Venus is also your choices. Here you have Venus conjunct the moon in Capricorn in this very Saturn-ruled, and by the way, it was because of her husband's work with these very dangerous conspiratorial men working with this alien. This is getting too weird. If you've never seen the X-Files, this is weirder than astrology at this point. But here you see the moon within the very practical Capricorn conjunct Venus, her emotions having to make a choice squaring Mars and Uranus. It's profound, it's powerful, and it's in the 6th house, which is the house of health and ill health especially. So you can imagine the illnesses that this woman went through later in life based on making this terrifying, horrifying decision. Jeez. And you'll note the south lunar node within this chart is conjunct Saturn, okay? So again, Saturn is opposing the moon, and the lunar nodes are involved. I mean, this is very disturbing. A very disturbing chart. You can see the story play out in this chart. The mother and the father are both in detriment, squared by Pluto, Lord of Death. But note again that we have Uranus on the IC, so this shocking motivation to the moment as it changes Mulder's whole life. And Mulder will wind up doing amazing things and actually solving a lot of crimes, although it seems like he never quite has the evidence to prove what happened, but protecting a hell of a lot of people out of this. Often with astrology, these horrible things that happen, one of the benefits of digging into transits and how they affect a natal chart is you see what the point of it was. You see where you were meant to grow through this. And so some of the most difficult times in your life become motivating to do something much better and help other people down the road, which again is this Chironian theme. We see here as well Neptune very, very closely conjunct the Sun, which is of course conjunct Mulder's IC, right? So the power of the Sun is being given to these Neptunian delusions and guilt. This motivates him for the rest of his life. But we also see that the Neptune is going to be diluting the Sun and creating this main solar energy is going to be colored by guilt and sorrows, which of course we see in this chart so prominently. And note it's within the 5th house of this chart, and again it's a child being abducted, and the 5th house is about children. Pluto is in the 3rd house of siblings, the planet of the mythology of the lost daughters. And there he is in the 3rd house, stealing Samantha. That's phenomenal and shocking and disturbing. And it's also interesting that, with this opposition between the moon and Saturn, you have this mutual reception between the moon and Saturn. So getting deeper into some of the things we're never really given really clear answers about within the show is how much the mother was colluding with these conspiracies and how much she was to blame as well. Listen, I don't want to victim blame here. This is a horrifying fictional experience we all had to go through. And what winds up being the most important thing about this mundane chart we're looking at is the fact that this Uranus-Mars opposition, which is exactly squares the midpoint of his Jupiter and Saturn conjunction. So drawing together these energies of what Mulder is capable of doing in his life with the outer planet energies of Jupiter and Saturn together are being shocked and goaded into action by Uranus and Mars. So we just this chart that they gave us works with Mulder's natal chart so incredibly. It's hard for me to believe that this was not done on purpose. Mars rules Scorpio, and so this conjunction we see between Mars and Mercury, Mars has the upper hand. You can see within Mulder when he gets an idea, he has to act on it, is stoic stuck-to-itiveness in his ideas, how he sticks to what he thinks he knows, because this is happening within a fixed sign. This watery, judgmental element of Mars ruling his Mercury, you can see how easily he's manipulated by the powers that be, often giving him little threats that they want him to go down to do their bidding, and he's always getting suckered in by these people. You can see that with that Neptune on his Mercury, easily deluded, and then all happening within watery and passionate Scorpio. They know how to play this boy. Another element of Mulder having both Venus and the Sun in fallen signs, which, is them not at their most powerful and profound, but it's worth thinking about the fact that no matter what your chart says, this is in detriment, this is in fall, you still have to live it. It's still your chart. There's still benefits and positives to every placement in a chart, which is hard for people to see sometimes. But there's always a negative if it's called fall, right? For Mulder, what we see there is the fact that his Venus rules his Sun. When he doesn't get what he wants, you can see how miserable he gets. There are some episodes where he just gives up on life. There's a whole running thread in one of the seasons where he just gives up for, a quarter of a season. Yeah. Uranus and Pluto in the 12th house definitely imply these unresolved issues that can be Mulder's undoing. But it also implies that his shocking ideas, Uranus, lead to power struggles with authority. Bingo! Don't we see this enough? Uranus here in the 12th also kind of implies that his quest towards the shocking and bizarre are going to lead him into more and more problems than they may be worth. But that Saturn-Jupiter square to his sun demands that he do the work, and he put the effort in anyways, even if it's his own undoing. After all, it's conjunct his North Lunar Node, and his North Lunar Node is in Leo, as is the ascendant of the chart from when his sister was abducted. There's glory for our young Mulder. There is. Like I keep saying, within a natal chart, sometimes astrology is going to show you 5 different ways the same message. And here again we see his moon in the 3rd house. Uranus squares this moon, this shocking change to his security, to his family, to his memories. And Uranus is in the 12th house of unresolved issues. Come on. Note also that his Venus, this charmer, this little Libran charmer over here, is trine his Jupiter Saturn. And you can see how Mulder is an extremely likable character, despite being a pariah, despite breaking all the rules all the time, doing his own thing, not listening to his bosses. He still has the support of powerful people within the FBI, and as such is able to keep his job. Fascinating. There's that trine, that element of ease with his charm and with what he needs to do in the world. And it's also interesting that his Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is within the 5th house of play and creativity, because you can see when he's on to something new he's never thought of before, or a crazy new theory, and he sees something, you look at the light, he lights up, man, he lights up. You see that. It's play for him. What he does is play for him, despite all the disturbing elements of this Pluto-Moon square. Hashtag never forget his Chiron. Mulder's chart is a bowl shape. The bowl shape implies someone who's always putting their energy out to the other half. All of their planets are on one half of the chart, and they know what they have, and they know what's lacking outside of themselves. And so they're always trying to project their energy into the empty part of the chart, which is the other. So you can see here that the moon is just separated from the sun and is trying to move towards a new idea, a new concept, something new within the reality. But it's still constrained by the sun a little bit. You can see once again, yet another multiplication of the same theme within the same chart, which is being held back by the past instead of moving purely towards the future. Fight the future. I don't want to get into progressions too much, although they do have a place within the show. I feel like I have enough to deal with as it is, but it's worth noting that, and I'm not going to explain what they are within the context of this video, we can get to that another day, but for people who do know, Mulder's progressed sun was a year or 2 into moving into Scorpio when his sister was abducted. So you can see here another accentuation of the Scorpio theme that now begins this 30-year phase of his life, which is more intense and more obsessive with the Scorpio energy on his sun. Now we need to get to the thing that everyone loves to do, which is the synastry of Mully and Sculder. The symmetry of Mully and Sculder. Now I don't want to get too much into this because it's such an intense feat to really properly do synastry. I mean, really, ideally synastry is you do an entire reading for one person, an entire reading for the other partner, and then you do a separate reading after that. Once you completely understand the charts of each person and the progressions and the transits of where each person is at in their lives, then you can bring them together and look at all these factors together at exactly where these charts are in life, and come to some meaningful understanding of how these charts relate to each other and how they're moving through time together as a unit. It's a little bit much for this video, but we'll just hit on some key points. Within the charts of Sculder and Mully, I'll leave it like that, it's fair. Sculder and Mully is that their houses are exactly reversed. And this is a prominent theme you see often in synastry when you're looking at couples which stick together, is that one's ascendant is conjunct the other's descendant and vice versa, as well as their IC and their MC. One of the interesting things about this is transits happening in one house for one partner are going to be in the opposite house for the opposite partner. And so there's a certain element there where they go through life where when one's up, the other's down. I find that really interesting about these 2 charts together. So the IC of one is conjunct the MC of the other quite closely. This is a profound connection, especially for people who are essentially working partners, where the motivation of one is the same as the peak of status for the other. You can also view it as an opposition between each of their careers, which is true, where Scully's trying to make a solid name for herself and Mulder is really just after the truth. And they conflict each other in that way. And yet, the deepest motivation of each is compelling the other's career and their status in the world. What a profound connection between two working partners. When we view their sons, while they are not within a major aspect of each other, there's something I always found interesting about Libra and Pisces, in that these are two signs that, more than any other sign in the zodiac, wants harmony to a certain extent. Libra will try and negotiate their way there logically, and Pisces will feel their way there, trying to have harmony with whatever situation they're within. Mulder's Chiron, this wound which will never heal, and as we know, this is his sister's abduction, is exactly conjunct Scully's Sun and Mars. So you can see here how Mulder's internal wounding winds up becoming a motivating factor for Scully's life mission. She winds up joining Mulder's deep wounding, and her whole career becomes completely devoured by Mulder's own traumas. Now, Mulder's ascendant is exactly conjunct Scully's Pluto-Uranus conjunction. This I find really fascinating because we discussed how Mulder can't, although he's a Virgo ascendant, he can't seem to piece the facts together and he can't seem to close his cases in a satisfactory manner. Here you see Scully's Pluto-Uranus conjunction. The harsh truth, Pluto, of the shocking things, Uranus, is exactly on his ascendant, what he wants to put out into the world. And we see this within the show, where he's able to often send Scully off with the facts, to really dig into it, to, literally cut open the bodies and find the hard evidence, while he's off chasing his dreams. A prominent way that these two relate. And within Synastry, any planet of one partner on the other partner's angles becomes such an intense connection between them. You see it so prominently. Mulder's Sun, his Mars, and his Mercury are all in Scully's 8th house of death. And how many times am I going to have to say this within this video, that Mulder keeps putting Scully in the line of danger? He doesn't want to. He loves her. I'm sorry, man. We know. I'm not trying to put you down, Mully. But you're not good for her. Sorry. And as to that, Scully's Jupiter-Venus conjunction is exactly opposite Mulder's Sun. Specifically Jupiter. Exactly. Now, one thing to note is that opposites attract, and opposites can see each other more clearly than any other aspect. They're in the exact opposite ends of the spectrum. There's a lot of conflict there, but there's a lot of being able to see each other clearly. Now, whether you can connect on that level is another story altogether. Whether you can make the other person understand what you see about them. Scully's Jupiter-Venus, and while I discussed Jupiter-Venus about, Jupiter having the ability to blow up one's desires and passions to, almost unreasonable proportions, it can also blow up one's compassion and one's ability to connect with others on a very deep level. And we see this as being opposed Mulder's Sun. Her Jupiter is also squared Mulder's Jupiter. Now this is interesting. Her ability to understand things in a long-term context is exactly at odds with his. His Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is within Capricorn, a very practical sign, a very driving sign, trying to use one's wisdom to create something meaningful within society. Scully's Jupiter is within Aries, very, very driving, even more fiery, but connected with Venus. There's a pleasantry in that, and yet there's a conflict there. And you can see how often at the end of the episodes, even though they both experience the exact same bizarre, shocking thing, they have different takeaways. And that's a fascinating thing to get to the end of an X-Files episode and see how each of them sort of wraps up their understanding of what happened. Now here's one thing I like. Scully's dignified moon in Cancer, which is again conjunct the North Node, which can create even more meaning and substance to something, and imply that there's a deeper meaning to that point of a chart, is sextile Mulder's ascendant Pluto conjunction, enshrining his Neptune Mercury Mars conjunction. So here you have these easy aspects between these things. You can see how Scully understands and sympathizes with Mulder's motivations, even when he's ostracizing himself and her from the future she dreamed of. She's still able to be compassionate towards Mulder and see the purpose of what he's doing and align with it. And her moon is within his 11th house of hopes and dreams and the benefit of the group. And if you wonder why Scully is drawn to Mulder, who clearly is so bad for her in so many ways, her vertex also is conjunct his ascendant. So the vertex being, in my experience, almost a more sensitive version of the descendant, where you take energy in a very special, significant point, and his ascendant is right there. But her Pluto is also conjunct that vertex, and they both are within Mulder's first house, so she's always poking at his inability to stick that landing with his work, and so you see that Pluto in his first house, the critical nature that Scully comes at Mulder with. Scully's North Lunar Node is within Mulder's 10th house, part of her life journey in this incarnation relating to his mission. And Mulder's North Lunar Node on Scully's descendant, his life mission connecting deeply with her right at that most sensitive point. Also, as I mentioned earlier, his Uranus on her descendant in her 7th house, this shocking thing just changes her whole world. It comes in through her descendant where the sun sets, the western horizon, where things are the most receptive. And that's where his Uranus is. Scully's ascendant, Saturn, Mercury, Sun, Mars, all within Mulder's 6th house, all conjunct his South Lunar Node and his Chiron. This intense energy of whoa! The house of slaves and servants. Dear goodness me, is that what Scully is? I didn't say it, the chart said it, I didn't say it. At any rate, there's also elements of, while it's the house of ill health, it's a house where one needs to improve themselves. When planets are transiting around the chart, they hit the 6th house before they cross the descendant and begin to rise into the upper stratosphere of a natal chart. The fact that most of Scully's main energy is all sectioned in Mulder's 6th house, you can see that within their relationship, where she's always goading him to be better, to be more rigid, to be more diligent. And also, Scully's sun squares Mulder's moon very closely, which is a very intense aspect of Synastry. The moon represents the past, and the sun represents the future. And you can see how Scully's sun is constantly at odds with Mulder's past. And there's episodes where she's just trying to bring him out of his own funk, bring him out of his own, when he's sunk into the lowest depths of himself, where she's goading him back to reality and back to what he needs to do. Mulder's Saturn-Jupiter conjunction straddles Scully's 11th and 12th house. So you can see how his Saturn restricts and restrains her connection to groups and others, like at the FBI, for instance. But his Jupiter is within her 12th house, inspiring her to dig deeper into the more mystical and spiritual realms. And Scully's Chiron is on Mulder's descendant, so when Scully is hurt, Mulder feels it so deeply, and it becomes such a motivating factor for him. Any given natal chart you can work with the rest of your life and continue to discover new things. Not saying that facetiously, I truly believe that. You live with your own natal chart as an astrologer, and it never stops impressing you with all the different elements of your life it describes, and how specifically it describes things the deeper and deeper you go into it, and the more you learn different methods and different ideas about how to structure astrology. And so In trying not to look completely insane, how much effort do you put into the charts of fictional characters? Why am I doing this? It's been years I've been thinking about this. For years. And I just keep finding new things that seem to imply this whole journey we're on here in trying to understand Mulder and Scully and the legitimacy of their astrological journey. So in general, in a proposition like this, I'm not going to go that deep, or at least I shouldn't be going this deep. And yet, I started to get a little curious about the fixed star placements of these charts. And I'm not going to go into depth of all the details because there is some, but Scully's chart was a bit more interesting than Mulder's chart. Specifically, her sun is conjunct Fomalhaut, one of the four royal stars of Persian antiquity. Specifically, it's been written that Fomalhaut conjunct the sun can lead to dangerous bites from venomous creatures. How much have we seen? Anyways, you've seen the show. You know what I'm talking about. Scully's moon is conjunct Sirius, which comes with a certain amount of honor and faithfulness, which we see with Scully. And specifically with the moon, it's been written that it lends oneself to having a prominent influence from the opposite sex. Once again, Mulder being coded into this chart. And it also implies dog bites, and I'm sure at some point she got bit by a werewolf. Who knows? Can't remember. Again, I don't want to jump down too many weird rabbit holes in this because there's already way too much material to go over, but Mulder happens to also have Nessus, another Centurion, on his midheaven, opposing his moon. And prominent Nessus placements have been said to correlate with the end of a genealogical line. Now, I don't want to spoil latter-day seasons, but episode 15 of season 8, Mulder specifically talks about how his sister was murdered. He was almost taken out, and his parents are dead, and that he's the end of the line, and here we have this Nessus prominent placement. Now, in taking a fictional character's chart through time in a serialized show like The X-Files, you have the ability to time events within your fictional world to real-world synchronicities within the planets, and this is where I feel using astrology in a fictional way has this long-term benefit of sticking to something that's real outside of your imaginary realm. As I already discussed in relationship to Scully's natal chart, the first time you really get a good sense of exactly where you are time-wise within the X-Files is Beyond the Sea, which is her Saturn return. After that, the next time we get a real solid date is Erlenmeyer Flask. And at this episode, which is the final episode of the first season, some prominent things start happening which have reverberant effects throughout the rest of the series. And there are profound things happening to these two people's natal charts as this goes down. So to start, Saturn is on Mulder's descendant, and this to me becomes a very prominent proof of this natal chart that I'm using. Because Saturn on the descendant is going to restrict how you're received by others, and the events of this episode lead to them actually shutting down the X-Files, which is a very literal and prominent way to display a Saturn descendant. In the meantime, Mulder's main ally and confidant, who's been feeding him all these different classified information, winds up dying within this episode. Mulder is captured and held hostage, and Deep Throat arranges to make a deal to give the Erlenmeyer Flask this evidence of alien life, which is always just under the surface, hidden in a Neptunian shroud of mystery and incapability of structuring itself in a Saturnine way. And so he makes this deal to trade this flask in for Mulder's life, and winds up getting murdered in the course of the trade. Now, if you see this, it seems clear that he knew the danger of this trade, and it feels like for the sake of trying to save humanity, he makes this sacrifice. It's not, it's never quite said in quite a clear way, as the X-Files was so good at being very nebulous. But we see here that there was a Mars-Moon conjunction taking place that day within Mulder's 8th house, which is the house of death. Now, there was actually a statistical study done showing that Moon-Mars relationships within a natal chart had a tendency towards suicide. That suicidal victims had a slight statistical chance to have some form of Mars-Moon aspect in their chart, which implies that the sort of anger of Mars gets turned inward into the inner world of the moon. And so having this transit happening in Mulder's 8th house feels like, again, it's a description of this character giving up his life for this greater cause. Now, a further ramification of what happens after this episode is that the X-Files actually get shut down in the wake of this man's death. And so again, we see Saturn restricting Mulder's relationship to other people in the outer world as Saturn moves up into the upper horizon of his chart. As the show went on the air, as I mentioned, was part of this very historic Neptune-Uranus conjunction. This Uranus-Neptune conjunction is happening on his Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Wow. So his life mission and his ability to take in the wisdom of his experiences and structure them in a concrete way is just being decimated by delusions and by the shocking nature of Uranus, especially. As well, Jupiter just so happens to be on his Mercury-Mars-Neptune conjunction. So you have Jupiter, the understanding, and also just the expansive nature of Jupiter can blow up whatever's happening there. And so his obsessive Martian desire to solve this case is now being exacerbated by Jupiter. And note, Jupiter, Neptune, and Uranus are all retrograde at this point. So they're all a little bit closer to the Earth, and they're moving backwards and all affecting these key points in his chart as a means of taking a few steps back, which is what's going to have to happen in the next season. Now, I should also mention that via progressions, Mulder's progressed Venus and progressed Mercury wind up conjuncting the year that he meets Scully. So his heart and his values are coming together with his way of thinking and expressing himself and meeting this perfect partner for him, this perfect counterbalance. Now for Scully, we have a range of transits showing her, because she's been the consummate skeptic for this entire first season and been the counterbalance to Mulder and always trying to get him to prove his facts, and no matter what she sees, she's always looking for that other explanation. This episode is a key moment in her seeing how serious the powers that be are about hiding the issues that they're looking at and this whole conspiracy of aliens that Mulder believes in. And so the transits here are showing us how violence is moving Scully forward in her path of acceptance and belief. Mars is conjunct Jupiter in her chart in Aries. So here you have the fiery and sometimes, in this case, very literally violent nature of Aries and Mars right on her Jupiter, on her long-term understanding and wisdom. She sees it for herself. She sees Deep Throat get shot. Meanwhile, Saturn is now transiting Scully's first house after her Saturn return. So there's a structuring happening within her identity, within how she puts herself out into the world, where she needs to work on her own perception of who she is. And by looking at the astrology, a big part of this is her connecting with her Piscean sun on a deeper level and trusting her instincts instead of demanding rigid scientific evidence for everything, because it's not going to serve her in all cases, especially with what we continue to see in this show. Now, Saturn is also exactly squaring her line of power, the MC and the IC. So there's a challenge here between her inner world and her outer world, her career and her inner motivation, which is being lit up by the ideas of Mulder and her growing connection to him. In relationship to this, her progressed Saturn had just moved into Pisces as this season begins. We don't know the exact date that this season begins, but around the same time in this year, progressed Saturn had moved into Pisces. This is mind-blowing to me because often astrologers don't even look at Jupiter out in progressions, but profound things can happen there. And very few people have Saturn changing a sign via progressions. But she does. It goes from rigid, cold, hard scientific facts of Aquarius into Pisces as she meets Mulder. Amazing, poetic, beautiful. Was it planned? I don't know. Is it amazing? Yes, the universe is bloody amazing. Meanwhile, as Saturn squares the line of power, Pluto is squaring her line of consciousness, the ascendant-descendant line. So here, the way she relates to people in the descendant and the way she relates to herself and projects herself is undergoing this harsh Plutonian revolution. And the murder of this informant is a key moment in her having to understand who she is and how she relates to the outer world. Now, progressions deeply describe the inner path, the inner journey of someone. And if you look at it logically, really, Mulder is already set on his path, doing what he needs to do when this show begins. Really, the transformative metamorphosis we see in this show is with Scully. Because with Mulder, we're generally just seeing this recurring themes happening again and again for him, just dragging him deeper and deeper into his own journey. Whereas Scully has hit this huge crossroads at the beginning of this show, and we watch as she slowly opens her mind and sees a wider world. As such, her progressions wind up being much more interesting than Mulder's. Her progressed Venus is opposed her natal Neptune, so her values are undergoing a process of mystification. You know, and I mean that in both senses. See what I'm saying there? So while her Venus is undergoing this process, her progressed Mercury and her progressed Ascendant are conjunct her natal Venus. So here she's thinking deeper with her heart, and she's connecting deeper with her heart and redefining these values, which go back to her own Christian roots, which she struggles with a fair amount within the show, trying to rectify her harsh scientific thinking with the deeper spiritual religious thought. And just to reiterate that message, which astrology loves to do to really drive points home, her progressed Venus is squaring her natal Mercury. So you have this doubling up of Venus-Mercury issues happening with Scully at the same time. And just to throw the kitchen sink at it, the transiting sun is squaring her Mercury as this episode takes place. Also, Chiron is opposed Scully's Sun and Mars. Next, in terms of dated episodes, we have probably the most important moment in the X-Files series, the moment where they had to get rid of Scully because she got pregnant for a little while. And so they concocted this scheme where Scully gets abducted by potentially aliens in order to free up their shooting schedule to not have to have her involved as she had this child. And interestingly enough, I mean, Chris Carter was kind of flying by the seat of his pants as he was making this show. He's claimed that doing this was what created the X-Files Myth Arc episodes and forced them to serialize the whole thing. Whereas before, that wasn't even the plan. They were just going to go week by week and just kind of have this kind of general conspiracy in the background that Mulder was looking for his sister. This was the one episode that led them to keep creating these deeper and deeper conspiracies that we have to follow. And so, of course, by having Scully abducted, we see once again this repetition of the Persephone mythology, where we have another woman in Fox's life being kidnapped. And so, what are we going to see in the natal charts of these people to describe this very disturbing situation which happens? Well, I'll tell you first off, Chiron transiting is conjunct Scully's Pluto. Wow, this becomes a wound that she'll have to live with the rest of her life. And we learn much later from this episode that during this abduction, all of her ovum were harvested to be used in some nefarious, bizarre breeding plot that these people have going on. Chiron is also moving to oppose itself in her natal chart as she's abducted. So again, highlighting the importance of this wound. Her progressed moon is on her descendant. So here we see this description of her own personal safety being open to the outer world through her descendant, which unfortunately is also opposed Saturn. And just to really impress on what a huge moment this is, Saturn is exactly opposite Chiron within these transits. So Saturn is opposing Pluto in her chart. It's a powerful chart. It's a powerful chart showing where Scully was at. And this Saturn Chiron opposition is squaring her line of power, her IC and her MC. So it is obviously a brutal blow to her career, as it becomes a brutal blow to her inner world and her wounding. And it also needs to be noted that the Duane Barry episode takes place on a new moon, which specifically the standoff between him, and then we don't have an exact amount of days between when he's arrested and he breaks out of the hospital and arrests Scully. It seems to me it's probably about 2 days, so very close to this time frame, which would place the moon right there on transiting Chiron and natal Pluto. Fascinating. But this new moon, which is conjunct Mercury, is taking place in Scully's 6th house of illness, of ill health. So there's an accentuation on the 6th house for Scully. And we find out later that not only is she sterilized by this abduction, but she also winds up with an implant in her neck, which leads to her having cancer. As I already pointed out in the Erlenmeyer Flask episode, Pluto is still squaring her line of consciousness, which again, this is an even deeper redefining of how she relates to other people. Uranus is transiting her 12th house, which to me within this context implies this hidden illness which she doesn't know about yet, the cancer which is coming and the infertility. So also dialing back, Saturn had conjuncted Scully's Mercury somewhere around the beginning of the first X-Files season, or perhaps before. So this whole 30-year cycle of how one thinks about things, there's a stress there that needs to be addressed and redefined. You have to redefine your thoughts. And then in between her Saturn return and this Duane Barry episode, Saturn conjuncts her Mars Sun. When Saturn conjuncts the Sun, we set our goals for the next 30 years. We figure out what it is we want to do, and this would be around the time that she commits to working with Mulder and working on the X-Files. And just to really drive the point home, because it's what the universe does, her progressed IC, her deepest point, and there's a whole conflict of whether the IC, or rather the 4th house, represents the father or the mother, but yeah, there's a strong correlation with motherhood within home and your roots and where you come from, and the IC's been described as an umbilical cord, your umbilical cord to the past, in fact. Her progressed IC is conjunct her natal moon as she's abducted. So while this is obviously a disturbingly redefining moment in Scully's life, it's also a profound moment for Mulder, because he's been doing this solitary quest for so long. He finally has someone to work with and bat ideas about with, and work hard to try and prove the things that he can't prove. So right off the bat, we have Mars squaring his Venus. Mars has just moved into his 9th house of morality, and now we see Mulder having to deal with this profound assault upon someone close to him, and having to wrestle with, is it worth it? Is anything he's doing worth it if he's going to bring this level of violence into his life? So this Chiron-Saturn opposition we talked about in relationship to Scully's chart is now taking place exactly upon Mulder's line of consciousness. So the wounding from his sister has been brought up again, and it's on his ascendant, it's on what he's projecting out. Now he's going to have a harder time facing this quest that he has. Meanwhile, Saturn is still on his descendant, which is the cusp of the 7th house of partnership. His partner's been abducted. And this very closely squares his line of power MCIC, so his inner world and his career. It's clear, you don't have to explain any of that. In May of 1993, Mulder's progressed Mars moves from Scorpio into Sagittarius. Now this is right around the beginning, we don't have the exact date, but it's right around the beginning of the show starting. And this describes his work, his energy being put out into the world goes from the obsessive, compulsive Scorpio, where he's just been stewing on this, to now the adventure really begins. Sagittarius, going out there into the world with a sense of optimism and ability to actually find the truth. The arrow, the bowman, aiming at the truth. And this new moon, was taking place within Mulder's 12th house. So you can see this core moment of the X-Files, the way that the planets are positioned around their charts in that moment, with the dated moment that we have for all this, profoundly describes not just the action, but the journey that these characters are on. And transits and progressions describe how we're supposed to react to things and how we're supposed to grow through them and become more meaningful individuals contributing to society. Now, what amazes me, there's a beautiful moment at the end of this show where Scully's gone and Mulder wanders back to Sky Mountain, or Mountain, whatever it is. He wanders back to this mountain and looks up at the sky, and he just looks up at the stars. Where is she? Is she out with the aliens in the cosmos? And starfields in Hollywood are often very random dots of light. But there definitely it kind of looks like they tried to make the Pisces constellation in that starfield. It kind of does. And this episode, taking place in August, Pisces would be visible at night at that time. And so there's this other element, the famous poster, I want to believe, right? Pisces, key word, I believe. Scully is a Pisces. He's looking up at the sky to this Piscean constellation. It's a beautiful moment. I think it was on purpose. Now, in the second season episode of Colony, we have further intrigues going on with the conspiracy and all these doctors being killed, and he comes upon this alien cloning conspiracy. Now within here we see these long-term outer planet transits continuing to play out and become more and more specific. Again, the Pluto-Moon conjunction, which goes through at least the first 2 seasons of the X-Files that we've been discussing here, the time period where these mythology episodes are dated. We see Mulder once again come to within an inch of his life. Pluto conjunct Moon, the Plutonian death and rebirth cycle. Mulder pretty much literally dies and they have to keep him on ice. But on the psychological level, with the return of his sister, or, supposed sister, we see again Mulder having a need to address the harsh truths of his past. Saturn, which represents the father, is crossing the descendant of his chart, implying there's work that needs to be done with how he relates to other human beings and the outer world in general. And as frequently, astrology can be extraordinarily literal. These clone alien doctors are working at abortion clinics in order to access stem cells and fetuses to work with. What's more literal in terms of Pluto, the planet of death and rebirth, conjunct his moon, which is the mother and the womb. So we see here a very literal interpretation of this transit. Although I think the most profoundly unique thing about the transits to Mulder's chart in this 2-episode arc is the fact that Jupiter is conjunct his IC, his deepest motivation. As we've seen, I chose his chart specifically because of where Neptune was when his sister was abducted. I believe that Neptune was transiting his IC. And now Jupiter, the planet of understanding and opportunity and expansion, is there at his deepest core motivation. He believes he's found his sister again. And as always, he believes he's found evidence of this grand conspiracy, and aliens specifically. This episode actually opens with him saying that he can die happily now because he's finally found the truth, and that his life purpose was proven correct. This to me becomes a very beautiful example of Jupiter, the planet of wisdom, conjuncting his deepest motivation. Now, we don't have an exact birth time for Samantha Mulder's chart, nor would I try to discern one the way that I did with Mulder and Scully, because we just don't know enough about her. But she does have powerful synastry with her brother Fox, and I'm going to look at it specifically from Fox's chart because we have a house arrangement that we can fit her chart into. And what's profound is that her Chiron is exactly conjunct his descendant. The descendant is the most sensitive point for taking in energy from other people. It's where the sun sets. Watch the sun set. Watch the beautiful colors and see how much it affects you and how reflective you get during those moments. This is where her wound hits Mulder and then goes down into his IC to motivate him. Given they're only a few years apart, a lot of the outer planets are going to be in similar places, so the Pluto-Uranus conjunction is conjunct his ascendant as it is in his natal chart. But again, we're doubling up on those themes of the Persephone mythology. Now her moon, her past, her memories opposes Mulder's Mars, Mercury, Neptune conjunction. Again, we see deep motivation here. And the opposition is the place where two planets can most clearly see each other. They have opposing points of view, but they can see each other very clearly. And here, Mulder's Mars is aiming out towards where his sister's moon is. Her sun is very close to his Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Her Jupiter is opposed to his sun. And his sun is exactly square her lunar nodes. So her karmic energy from past lives and moving on into her present life is in this key motivating role for Mulder's sun. You know, we see this. Now, when we get to the 3-episode mythology arc, beginning with Anasazi at the end of the 2nd season, leading into the first 2 episodes of the 3rd season, this is the final major myth arc stretch, which is dated. We don't have dates throughout. It takes place over the course of probably a couple weeks, but we have a date for the beginning of it. So this arc notably opens up with Mulder being extremely out of character, extremely aggressive and violent. We find out very quickly that he's being drugged within his apartment, but this sets up the rest of this arc. The drugging can be seen by the fact that Neptune is conjunct his Saturn. How fascinating is this? Neptune of delusions, but also rules drugs, coming in and destroying his Saturnian barriers and boundaries and ability to control his own anger and inner hurt at the world that he has to live within, at the injustices and lies of the society that he's trying to save. Speaking to that, his progressed Mercury is conjunct his Mars-Mercury conjunction. So here, his progressed Mercury has a challenge with Martian anger. He's speaking out of turn. As such, his progressed Mars is also conjunct his moon. So we see here again the anger issues of Mars coming out, acting rashly, acting quickly without thinking. His progressed Sun moves into the 3rd house. Again, 3rd house of siblings. His progressed moon had just finished conjuncting his south lunar node. So again, the past, the sins of the parents and the family, and your past lineage is coming to light. And this is where, as this arc goes along, we see the most profound example of the Pluto-Moon conjunction, which has been going on all through these plot lines, where Mulder confronts his mother and asks her if she had to choose between him and her, as the syndicate took one of them as a safety mechanism to keep their father in check. Pluto conjunct Moon, harsh truth of his mother. So now the North Lunar Node is conjunct his Mercury, Mars, Neptune. Here we see some sort of fulfillment of where his quest has been going. It's also interesting to note this is taking place on Mulder's unbirthday or anti-birthday, however you want to call it. The sun's exactly opposite his sun, which can be a low and depressing time of the year. Another interesting ramification of Neptune conjunct his Saturn being the father, is that his father is killed in this episode. And so now there's guilt in relationship to how he feels about his father. Could he have saved him? But also, how much guilt does his father carry himself to the grave over the abduction of his sister and his complicity with this conspiracy? We also have Jupiter now in the 4th house, revealing truth about family, which begun back in the Colony episode. On top of it being his anti-birthday, the moon that day was exactly squaring the lunar nodes. Hence, the moon was at the southernmost point of its journey, the furthest it gets below the ecliptic into the underworld. When Mulder's dad dies, Saturn and Venus are exactly conjunct. And the Sun and Mercury are exactly squaring Mulder's own Saturn. Sun and Mercury within Aries, a god of war, violence. Also, within his 8th house of death. As well, the moon is moving up very rapidly towards a lunar eclipse taking place within Mulder's 8th house of death, and the moon will be in his 2nd house, personal values, where his sun is, while Mars is in his 12th house, hidden from him, his own ability to react. As we move along this arc, Scully's sister winds up dying, so in the scrum of this, she accidentally also loses her sister. Here we have Venus activating Scully's Chiron in Pisces. Venus being one of the feminine principles, she loses her sister here. We see this Sun-Mercury conjunction happening exactly on her Venus-Jupiter conjunction, the two great benefics together being activated by the Sun and by Mercury. What I find interesting about this, Mercury being sort of Cartesian logic and Jupiter being a deeper, larger vista understanding of things, that at the end of the episode, Mulder tells her that he believes the truth is in the X-Files. And she says she's seen the truth, now she wants evidence, which is yet again another cool moment where we're seeing this mixture of Aquarius and Pisces within her chart. And as to that, while Mulder had this Jupiter on his IC during previous episode, we now see Jupiter on Scully's MC, her midheaven, where through the X-Files perhaps, she's able to start regaining some of her career and credibility, as many of the cases that they solve do wind up bringing them credibility as the series goes along. Meanwhile, Pluto is squaring her Mars, Mars being the masculine principle, and as you can see throughout the course of this show, Mulder is the number one partner in her life, although it's rarely physical. They interact with each other on that level, and Mulder again almost dies. Alright, okay. So has it been overkill yet? Was it overkill? Is it overkill? Well, guess what? They did a frickin' episode all about astrology. So I get to it, and I'm like, oh my god, all the secrets of the universe are about to be revealed. Chris Carter's going to admit that he's a psycho like me who thinks the stars control you. So I start watching the episode, and it's a bloody nightmare. Astrology's so bad. It's just so bad. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I was in shock. You know, the absolute, just freakishly horrifying thing is they keep showing a full moon throughout the course of this episode, and it wasn't a full moon. That was a bloody waning gibbous. Almost half. So what happened here? What happened? Well, I'll tell you what frickin' happened. You can see it when they go to the house of the astrologer with that glorious, glorious luminescent sign in the front. Boy, if someone could find me that sign, I'd even be willing to open up a brick and mortar store and, make absolutely no profit. Fantastic. So they go in and immediately just I ain't doing no astrology for you boys until I get my money, honey. I might be paraphrasing, but essentially they're just portraying her as this money-grubbing, when I saw just how cheesy the astrology was, I realized, oh my god, here's where the conspiracy theory comes in. Chris Carter had this astrologer and had a falling out with her. I mean, I think what probably happened was he was just paying her rate, and when she saw how successful this show had become, she said, hey, I want a taste, I want a cut. And she probably asked for, some type of consultant fee for being on the X-Files. He said, whatever, we don't need you, I'm a hit. And so he wrote this episode. He wrote this episode to make fun of her. I'm sure of it. This is how I see it. I mean, you can see how he has a timed date at the end of season 2, and between season 2 and 3, this show had become just a cultural sensation at this point. The cliffhanger was Mulder just firebombed inside the buried train, and alien creatures running around, and you had to wait a whole summer to find out. And she was like, yeah, I want in. So let's dig into it a little bit. It's not outside the wheelhouse of Chris Carter to lace personal drama into the shows, believe me. And it should be noted, this one does bear the byline written by Chris Carter. So first off, he chooses a Syzygy, and which implies that there's, a straight line across the sky. Now this Syzygy, and the time that it happened, would have been taking place during the day, so you couldn't even see it. So it's not, wouldn't have been as striking an image. And even within that, this Syzygy takes place across two zodiacal signs. It straddles the borders of Capricorn and Aquarius, so in terms of astrological influence, that makes it not a stellium, which is a very profound astrological event which happens time to time. And they're not even all with declination parallel. Mars and Uranus are parallel, and they're widely sort of contra-parallel to Jupiter on either side of the ecliptic. I don't know. It's just a very strange choice for some big, massive, astrological event that was happening. And what makes it even weirder is the whole theme of the episode is these two girls who were born on the same day have some sort of psychic powers brewing, all because this Syzygy sort of opposes their Jupiter. Of all the planets, it's not even a person. It's not like the moon, which could have some sort of psychic implications. No, it's Jupiter, this long-term wisdom. And she's like, hey, it's fine. Syzygy isn't going to be a big deal, but if you happen to be born on this day because your Jupiter is there. What? What? Not even just that day. It's like anyone that year had Jupiter there. 12 years later, Jupiter's there. It's so weird. It's such a weird choice. Almost like they're just trying to trigger astrologers. Almost like they're just trying to trigger astrologers. You wonder what happens the second the clock ticks 12, which is, somewhat meaningless depending on where you are. I mean, it's not even necessarily true midnight where the sun actually passes the IC and something is actually happening. It's really triggering a new day. I mean, depending on where you were, it might not even be right on that IC, and all of a sudden the Syzygy's gone one day later. What? It doesn't even make sense. And they're just crying, oh, la 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 la. I don't know how much deeper I even want to go into it. I have all these. I've been documenting all this stuff. I don't even want to dig into it. There's a license plate that says 3219M4. What is that? I'm not even gonna look into it. I don't care. I don't care. You do it. I'm sure it means something. I'm sure it means screw you, astrologers. Screw you, astrology. I didn't want to pay. Oh, and then she says that they born in 1979, formed a grand cross with Jupiter and Uranus. There is no bloody bland cloth in the top. There's no bland cloth in the top. There's no grand cross in the chart. I don't know what bits of imaginary space dust she was using to formulate this grand cross. Ugh. I don't know how much Mulder paid for this reading, but it was too much. I hope he charged it to the feds. Regarding the astrological chart we have for these two girls, of course we don't have a birth time, but I thought it was interesting that they have Mars conjunct Sun, so, a very powerful ability to go out and get what they want. Also perhaps anger issues. They were also born on a full moon, but what I find really interesting is that they had Venus in Sagittarius. And we see that in this episode, because they keep having all these attractions to different guys, and it's very flippant, right? It's very fiery, but their attraction can shift very quickly. So we see Venus and Sag there, shiny new thing, shiny new thing, shiny new guy. What's sort of more profound, actually, for the episode is the fact that Pluto is moving to conjunct that fiery Venus, and we see a lot of their sort of anger issues are related to boys. And also Saturn is conjunct their south lunar node while all this is going on, implying some sort of karmic retribution from a past life. You know what? Maybe this astrologer they were talking to, maybe she actually had looked at the charts and knew what was going on. She just didn't give them all the info. Maybe this is deeper than I thought it was. I will tell you one thing. The house placements this Syzygy happens in between Mulder and Scully, based on my determined time, make perfect sense. Within Fox's chart, he has the Syzygy going on in his fifth house of sexuality and romance, Well, what do we see in this episode, Fox? Like, out of character trying to seduce this. It's really absurd. And he's also, drinking and just wilding out, man. He's having a good fifth house leisurely time. Meanwhile, Scully is having this Syzygy mostly within her 12th house, crossing over into the 11th, just touching the 11th with the sun, right? So here we see her with all these unresolved issues. What are her unresolved issues? About her attraction to Mulder, and she's getting extremely jealous of him and catching him with this other woman. Well, they weren't in a relationship, but it's coming out, these unresolved issues that she might not even be consciously aware of and willing to admit to herself. Meanwhile, the House of Undoing, she starts smoking. It's amazing. There's addictions in the 12th house. Love it. But her son, and Neptune's kind of on the border there, is taking place in her 11th house of friendship. Well, maybe she shouldn't have friend-zoned him. There are some sort of interesting things happening if you track the Syzygy through the chart of the day, because we're given times throughout the episode. So when they're playing Bloody Mary, the Syzygy is within the 5th house, which is where we place games and leisure. They're playing Bloody Mary. When she arrives at the cafe to console her boyfriend, it moves into the 4th house, which has some significations of family, but you could put consoling someone there to a certain extent. It's a place of comfort. And then as they move into the police station, it's crossing into the 3rd house of expressing yourself, of putting expression in your words out there. And this episode does end with a great speech by Mulder, which I may or may not include here. We'll see if I want to risk the copyright strike, because there's some music behind it, and it's not my music, and it's not my thinly veiled ripoff of Mark Snow's great music. We'll see. So we see here what I think is a powerful example of how astrology can be used within fiction, how you can plot and plan out these characters' trajectory through time, which is what we do as astrologers with our clients and with our own lives. The planetary energies are happening for everyone all the time. They're affecting you in all these different ways. And it's difficult to predict exactly how that's going to play out. But what's powerful about being an astrologer is that you're looking at these energies, and it's like waves on the ocean. You see this type of energy happening, coming up specifically to hit a specific layer of consciousness and an area of life for you. And so you tie on that surfboard and you start riding that wave. I hope that Chris Carter found himself another or qualified astrologer, and they can, direct him to make a few more episodes, a few more seasons of the X-Files, perhaps, or something new. He's a fascinating mind, and I hope he gets to create more. The beautiful constellation charts and Pythagorean color theorem as it relates to the zodiac were provided by Robin Armstrong. You can go, I'll put a link down there. You know what I'm talking about. You've watched YouTube before, link in bio. He makes a variety of amazing charts, adding in the I Ching and adding in various, the sidereal zodiac and the constellations where they are. And there's also a form with just fixed stars and heliocentric charts. Check it out, you got your own. It's a beautiful, different way to perceive astrology. Especially the one where there's a color mandala happening between all these planets. That's a special thing. That's a special meditation in itself to see. The Synastry charts were taken from astro-seek.com. An amazing website. Here is a genius of community building in what he does on that website. And the Synastry wheels he has are the best in the biz, because they show both house systems at once. I don't understand why different Synastry charts never want to show both of the houses together. It's such a great way to do your Synastry work. I don't know. I don't get it. Anyways, he's the best. Check him out. So this was a giant project that I've been thinking about for years after I started rewatching the X-Files. And this is a little excessive, I think, for a first episode of a new series that I'm doing here. We're going to dial it back after this, and I really want to have some specific ideas on how to sort of introduce the various concepts of astrology in a very simple way through various pop culture things. So we're gonna rein it way in after this, but I just want to show how I'm viewing things and how astrology relates to our culture, because it's an absolute tragedy that we aren't schooled in astrology, that we're not taught it in school. You can't understand religion or literature or even what the days of the week are without understanding astrology and understanding what the planets mean and what they've always meant to humanity. And so my intention is to, in a fun, enjoyable way, in a weird way, try to explain these things to people who might not be as aware of them or as versant in it, because we should all at least be able to speak the language of astrology. I think it's extremely important to your inner growth and to society and reality itself, because we're co-creating this reality with the universe, and that's a fact. And the better you understand the sky when you look up at it, the better you understand everything. This episode was brought to you today by the symbolic imagery of the Phalonic degree, of hat within a hat within an infinitely fractal network of extending hats. That's the symbol of this episode. It is interesting that great moments in history, such as the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, which the X-Files was begun under, where these outer planets touch, that degree becomes fused with that energy, and we continue to feel it decades later, 100 years later. It becomes defining moments, and I do believe X-Files is a show that people will continue to discover and try to interact with mystical and the paranormal through. People who enjoy a good detective drama, who may not have thought of some of the stranger, weirder things of our reality before. It holds up, trust me. It holds up.